The smell of butter hadn't even faded yet when it pulled me back to a night long ago, those days when we had breakfast for dinner, because all we had left were eggs and bread. I did not mean to remember, I just meant to make a cup of coffee like I do every morning, sit down at the kitchen table, flip through a few old newspapers, or watch my wife Linda arranging flowers on the front porch like she always does. But memories, they do not always wait for an invitation. Sometimes all it takes is one tiny familiar detail, like the soft yellow light that flickers on when you open the fridge door. I saw a few eggs sitting quietly in a paper carton and a loaf of sandwich bread more than halfway gone. Nothing special, but that simple image made my heart pause for a moment. My hand, almost on its own, reached for the old cast iron skillet, something I brought with me from my mother's house when she moved into the nursing home last year. The pan has darkened with time, its bottom a little bulged from years of heat. I kept it not because it is convenient, but because every time I hear it land on the stove, I feel this strange sense of peace. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the cool Formica countertop under my arm, and the gentle chime of the wind bells swaying outside in the morning breeze. Suddenly everything felt as clear as a slow-motion scene in an old film. I placed a slice of bread onto the skillet. The butter hissed gently the moment it touched the surface. The smell wasn't even strong, but I knew it was starting to spread. And right then, in the quiet kitchen of a 68-year-old retired man living in the suburbs of Ohio, I was no longer here. I was back on a night from long ago. And there was my mother, my brother Tom, my little brother Billy, the old refrigerator rumbling like a steam engine, and the strangest meal we ever had breakfast under the stars. If you have ever had a simple dinner that stayed with you forever, tell the story so someone out there can remember with you. To tell it right, I need to rewind the memory tape back to that Thursday afternoon when everything quietly turned down a little side road I would remember for the rest of my life. I got home earlier than usual, my backpack still clinging to the old scent of books and chalk. The late afternoon light was thin like a sheet of golden paper resting on the kitchen windowsill, quiet but cold. A gust of wind pushed through the door crack, making the floral curtain puff in and out like someone was softly sighing. In the kitchen, my mother sat at the table, an old notebook open in front of her, pouring a handful of coins onto the surface. One coin spun in a circle, then stopped standing still, like a tiny moon. Next to it was a stack of coupons cut out from the Sunday paper, their jagged edges rustling against each other with a steady scratch. I leaned against the doorway, trying to act casual. My stomach was thinking of the roasted meat my mother usually made on weekends, but my eyes were locked on the crossed out numbers, added, subtracted, then crossed out again. Mom picked up one coupon, folded it into quarters, and smoothed the edge with her finger. She folded the coupon into 4 pieces, and I folded up my excitement. That's a sentence I only found years later. Back then, the little boy inside me just swallowed hard and changed the subject. The rotary phone on the kitchen wall rang a short, hesitant ring, like it did not want to interrupt. Mom answered, nodded a few times, and said, "Yes, I understand." Next week, then, she set the receiver down gently, as if afraid the sound might break something fragile. Then she whispered, "Your dad's paycheck is delayed." It was not the first time, but every time felt like the sky falling just 1 inch lower. Tom, my older brother, was leaning against the cupboard, silent as a shadow, hands tucked into his pockets. eyes staring out at the porch. Billy, the youngest, stood by the window, asking questions only kids know how to ask straight into the heart. Mom does. Snowfall because the sky wants us to stay home. If we stay home, are we eating something round tonight? Mom gave him a soft smile and ran her hand through his hair, not promising anything. The snowstorm was not bad, just enough to blur the windows and quiet the streets. But in our little town, even a forecast of snow flurries could make the corner grocery store put up a sign closing early due to weather. I still remember the bell on the door jingling as the owner locked it and the way he raised his hand to apologize through the fogged-up glass. He pointed to the store hours sign, then quickly placed the last 2 loaves of bread back on the shelf before turning away. We stood outside for a while, our breath turning to white clouds, and without saying a word, we turned back home. Back in the kitchen, Billy asked again, this time going straight for the question adults never like to answer. Mom, are we poor? Mom leaned back slightly, looked out the now dark window, and said, "Sweetheart, we're just waiting for something that's coming a little late." Her words felt like a thin blanket, not truly warm, but enough to stop the kids from tossing and turning. On the radio, the weather forecast was read in a sleepy voice. Northern winds, light snow. Expected temperatures dropping below freezing. The sound of my mother clipping coupons mixed in with those cold numbers, giving the kitchen a sort of rhythm. Tom opened the cupboard and found the old ceramic mug with a hairline crack. He moved slowly, like someone who already knew what kind of night this would be. I stood up and opened the brown paper bag on the table, a bit of butter, a half-used jar of cinnamon, and a cheap bottle of vanilla extract someone had gifted us last holiday. I said nothing, just lined them up like playing cards adults had no choice but to play. Mom pulled open the drawer, took out a roll of brown paper and a dull pencil. She began a grocery list for tomorrow: milk, flour, cheap sausage, then crossed out each item one by one, as she remembered that tomorrow in our town sometimes meant when the paycheck arrives. I understood that kind of silence. It was not heavy, just thick enough to make you hear the wall clock ticking a little louder. I opened the fridge to check one last time, just to reassure myself I hadn't missed anything. The fridge light came on cold and clear. The egg tray sat neatly, the loaf of bread half full, a bit of butter wrapped in wax paper. That was it. A lit fridge that's almost empty sometimes. Light only reveals the silence. I stood there for another breath, then closed the fridge door like closing a thin book. Billy rummaged through an old tin and came out with a few coins, placing them on the table. "Here's my share," he said. Tom glanced over, not teasing like he usually would, just pulled the tin closer, closed the lid, and pushed it gently back to its place. My mother reached out and touched my hand, a barely there gesture, but enough to tell me I was standing in the right place. She said, "It's okay, Jack. We'll come up with something simple and warm." Outside, the wind changed direction, carrying the smell of damp pine and the crunch of tires over light snow. Inside, tiny details started to grow bigger. A last strip of sunlight, still warming the edge of the counter, a faint pencil mark from when Billy had drawn a snowman on a sticky note. Mom's handkerchief hanging by the sink. Everything felt like it was waiting for one small decision to fall into place. And that was the moment Thursday afternoon ended, giving way to an evening that ever since always comes back to me whenever I smell butter hitting a hot pan. But that decision, how we turned scarcity into a new name for dinner, only came after one very quiet moment. like the soft scratch of a pencil on paper. I'm going to tell you what happened next. From the gentle closing of that refrigerator door, the story took a peaceful turn, one I have always called the shortcut to peace. Mom looked past us as if reading the wind, then pressed her palm to the countertop to feel its warmth. She lifted the heavy cast iron pan from its hook, the kind of weight that made the counter hum with a soft, deep note like a signal that something was beginning. I caught a glimpse of her reaching into the drawer to grab the old butter knife smoothed shiny from years of use, and a wooden tong with a dark burn mark along one edge. She handed out tasks like she had rehearsed this moment in her mind. Jack, you watch the flame and flip the bread. Tom read out the menu to make the house cheerful. Billy set the table, give me the scratched plate. Her voice was soft but steady like a conductor, giving rhythm to an orchestra. I turned the gas knob, heard the click of the burner, and a soft blue flame curled into a ring of light. I dropped a pat of butter into the pan. It melted with a sound that felt like a sigh. As the edges began to bubble, I pressed the first slice of bread down. The warmth traveled up the handle, settling into my palm. Mom did not sigh. She lit the stove like she was lighting a small hope. Tom cleared his throat, flipping a pencil behind his ear like a waiter in a fancy restaurant. Welcome to the Starry Night Cafe. Tonight we're serving moon-fried eggs, golden toast delights, and a side dish of silence lightly seasoned. Billy was thrilled to set the table. We had 4 porcelain plates, none of them matched. One had a chipped green rim, one was painted with wheat stalks, one was plain, and the last had a crack running close to the edge. He lined up the forks and knives carefully, all pointing toward the center of the table like soldiers standing at attention. Mom cracked the eggs so gently not a single piece of shell dropped. The yolks were round, the whites sizzled as they spread and met the butter, popping into tiny golden dots that smelled like comfort. I tilted the pan so the melted fat would run to the edge of the bread, turning golden. The smell of toast coming to life felt like the first line drawn on a blank page. Outside, the wind slipped through the cracks, but instead of cold, it just carried the scent of butter, further made it richer. Tom continued, "Would you like your yolk runny or firm, dear guest? We also offer salt, pepper, and, well, a touch of courage." I laughed, my nose inhaling deeply, and my throat warmed up all at once. Billy pulled out a checkered tablecloth from the bottom drawer. One corner was torn, so he smoothed it out with a spoon as carefully as someone fixing a roof. I slid the spatula under the bread, waiting for that quiet shift in color at the edge. A little lesson Mom once taught me: do not flip because you're impatient. Flip because it's time. I flipped it smoothly. The toast landed with a soft thump. Mom nodded with a tilted smile. Now that's what I call perfect. I felt my palm warm up like someone had placed a small hot stone right in it. The butter kept singing, tiny bubbles chasing each other toward the center of the pan, disappearing and reappearing at the edges, a happy little cycle on a quiet night. Mom sprinkled the eggs with a bit of salt and coarse black pepper. The flecks landed on the whites like tiny night stars. She tilted the pan to keep the whites from going too thin. I layered the toast neatly onto the edge of the plate, a curved golden brown ribbon you just wanted to bite into. Billy suddenly said, "How about we have music tonight?" He turned the radio knob and found an oldies station. A warm male voice slipped through the static, soft enough to fill the background without taking up space. Tom swayed his shoulders, playfully asked Mom, "And what would the lady like to drink?" We've got warm water with vanilla essence. Or warm water with vanilla essence. Mom laughed. I'll take the second one. The flames gently licked the edge of the pan, casting a ring of golden light like a little halo. Ordinary things dressed up for something special. I let my spatula rest for a moment, glancing at Billy carefully placing salt and pepper into an old glass jar. He stuck a tiny label on it that read, "Pepper," in his neat, slanted handwriting. These small gestures, so simple, gave the kitchen a center, a rhythm, a quiet kind of unity. Another batch of toast went on. Butter was running low. Mom scraped the rest with the knife, dotting each slice like an artist finishing their final brush stroke. The warmth from the pan started to fill every corner, fogging up the windows. I wiped a circle clean with my hand, just enough to see the deep blue sky outside. The stars had not come out yet, but somehow the kitchen light already felt like the sky. From that moment on, poverty had the scent of butter and the sound of laughter. I placed the first plate in the center of the table. Tom lowered his voice. "Your moon-fried egg, dear guest." Billy nodded, his feet still dangling above the floor. Mom handed me the spoon, gently pressing it into my palm like a seal. "You keep the fire going, Jack." I nodded. In my mind, a tiny door opened. Maybe being short on things could still be named. Reimagined, turned into something else. Through a little game, simple and sacred. No one said a word, but everyone knew the dinner was just waiting for one more person. At the doorstep, footsteps brushed against the wind. I turned the flame down low. The blue ring shrank into a quiet little circle. And that night's story, as always, was complete the moment the door opened. The wooden door paused for just a beat before opening, like someone tapping their own chest to make sure the heart was still beating steady. Dad stepped in the cold, trailing behind his shoes, leaving faint crescent marks on the linoleum floor like a sliver of moonlight. His coat was heavy soaked with the stubborn smell of stone dust, and somewhere in there was the damp scent of metal. The kind of smell you only find in places where light takes the long way to arrive. He stood still for a few seconds, looking over the table, as if unsure whether he had walked into the right house, then set down a folded envelope beside the salt jar. No one rushed to speak. I heard the sound of a chair shifting the table leg, scraping against the floor. Quiet sounds, but heavy enough to carry the weariness of a man who had walked through an entire day. Mom gently touched his elbow and motioned to the chair. "Sit down." He exhaled through his nose, long but light, like a habit of letting go of a small burden before dinner. "Breakfast, huh?" Dad smirked. A simple joke, but it clicked something open and the whole room lit up halfway. He gave a short laugh, the kind so rare, felt like finding a coin still hiding in your coat pocket. Tom handed him a napkin with a waiter's flourish. "Sir, welcome to the Starry Night Cafe. We are honored to serve you." Billy, thinking no one noticed, pushed the prettiest slice of toast toward him. Dad sat, placed his rough, cracked hands at the table's edge, then leaned back. Not to rest, but to be exactly where he needed. I slid him the first plate of eggs yolk, trembling slightly. Black pepper scent rising just in time. He looked at the plate, then at us, his gaze from Mom to each kid, as if counting heads, then counting again. Mom nodded, raised her fork first, the way she always signals it's time. Dad bit a corner of toast, chewed slowly, nodded no praise, no complaint, just the Midwestern nod. "It's good." I saw Mom's shoulders ease slightly, not much, but enough. The room seemed to breathe differently. Billy asked, as if afraid to break the moment, "Dad, are the eggs?" Good Dad dipped his fork into the yolk, pulled it across toast, leaving a soft yellow streak like early sunlight. Good, crisp like a Sunday morning. Tom laughed. See, our little cafe just earned a star. Mom gave Tom a playful look. Eat. The envelope lay by the salt jar, quiet as things that know they will be opened, but not now. Dad nudged it aside like moving a stone off the path. He scooped crispy egg white from his plate's edge, for Billy pushed a thicker toast slice my way, then looked up at Mom. His rough hand rested on her shoulder. No words, but his thumb traced a soft circle, a signal that at this moment they were together. I poured him warm vanilla water. He sipped, inhaled through his teeth, sniffed a habit for judging smells, fragrant. That single word made everyone laugh. Dad could be funny with just one. I watched him lift a fallen crumb habit of a man used to every piece meaning something. His earlier smile still there, not fading. Mom tilted her head toward the stove. One more batch left. I adjusted the flame, tilted the pan so butter gathered in one corner, swirled, then sprinkled pepper. Dad followed my motions, pride low but visible. Maybe he saw more than toast, I felt. He saw a young man learning to hold home's fire. Dinner moved slowly. Conversation drifted like paper boats on water. Billy told of a dog he drew at school that almost looked like the real thing. Tom spoke less but kindly. Mom asked about work. Dad nodded, just a nod, then took the final bit of egg. Suddenly I wasn't hungry anymore, but I wanted more, not for fullness, but for this warmth in my chest. That night I understood. Some men only know how to say, "I'm okay," by sitting down. On the linoleum floor, his footprints had dried, faded like fresh memories, just beginning to settle. None of us touched the envelope. It wasn't avoidance. Some things are just meant to be handled at a different pace in the day. Dad rolled the fork in his fingers, the steel catching the kitchen light for a split second. Then he set it down with a soft ting on the ceramic plate, like a period closing out the day. Mom touched the back of his hand, wiped a streak of butter off the edge of his plate with a napkin, and smiled the kind of smile that said, "Dinner's done." "We're all right." I cleared the dirty plates. Tom gathered the silverware. Billy moved the salt jar back from the edge of the table so it wouldn't fall. Small actions done by the right hands. At the far end of the table, the envelope still waited for a quieter hour. For now, we just held on to the rhythm of breathing, the smell of butter and pepper, and the feeling that the grown-ups' shoulders were just a little lighter. When I pulled the pan off the stove, the warmth lingered long enough that my hand still felt the heat after letting go of the handle. I remember going quiet for a few seconds, listening to the house not be silent but full. Full, not with things, but with a soft kind of sound like paper brushing against paper. The night still had stories left to tell. But the moment Dad sat down, gave that short laugh, and laid his hand on Mom's shoulder, that was the moment the rest of the day stopped feeling dark. I still think if I had to choose one sound to remember that night by, it would be the scraping of the chair as Dad pulled it up to the table, so ordinary, no one noticed it, but powerful enough to move the whole evening into place, right next to each other. And it's right there in that togetherness that breakfast under the stars was etched into memory like a beautiful little word written in warm ink. After everyone was settled, no one said a word, but the kitchen somehow needed a new name to make that night feel lighter. I dug into the drawer and found an old, yellowed pot liner. I flipped it to the cleaner side, borrowed Tom's blunt pencil, and carefully wrote across the middle Starlight Diner. Below it, I wrote out each item like on the menus we'd seen at roadside diners during long road trips: moonlight fried eggs, golden toast, warm water with vanilla black pepper sea, salt, and just enough silence. I darkened the first two items and drew tiny stars along the edge for decoration. Tom grabbed the menu, cleared his throat like an MC, then placed a hand on his hip. Ladies and gentlemen of the Starlight Diner, please take a look at tonight's outstanding menu. He lowered his voice dramatically, half serious, half silly. Billy slammed his hand on the table, showing his chipped front tooth as he grinned. I'm ordering first. I placed the paper in the center of the table next to the salt jar and the little cup we had used to store crayons that afternoon. The soft yellow light of the kitchen bulb fell over the paper like a layer of honey. The pencil strokes faded in the wrinkled parts, darker where the surface was smooth. I tapped a spoon against the ceramic bowl twice to mimic a dinner bell. The radio crackled as Billy twisted the knob, skipped through static, and landed on an old song, gentle guitar chords rolling in like a lullaby for our meal. I sat up straight, clearing my throat to play my role as head chef: moonlight fried egg with tender yolk and crisp white edges, golden toast grilled until the crust whispers, warm vanilla water served in unchipped ceramic. Tom tilted his head and asked seriously, "And for dessert, chef?" I glanced at Mom. She smiled softly at the corner of her eyes. I clicked the pencil once and added the last line, "Laughter free of charge." In Mom's diner, laughter was the free dessert. The order started flying across the table like paper airplanes. Tom, in his best waiter voice, asked, would the lady like her moon egg, runny or firm, and for the young gentleman extra pepper drizzle or a sprinkle of cinnamon breeze. Billy spoke so fast he tripped over his words. I want 2 moons, no wait, 1 but big. And can I have extra moonlight on the side? I leaned in. What moonlight? He pointed to the trembling yolk on the sample plate. That round wobbly thing? Tom laughed and tapped his head. Our young master is ordering extra runny yolk. Chef. I nodded and marked it boldly on the menu. Billy ordered extra moonlight, just a runny yolk, and the whole family burst into laughter. The laughter wasn't loud, but it spread like ripples in a pond. I heard the spoon tap the bowl again, small sounds, arranging the air around us. The radio clicked into a voice segment, someone mentioning a pine tree lit earlier than usual this year. I didn't catch it all, but the image stuck. Fogged windows, golden lights on dark green, spoon taps, static pencil, scratches, 3 tiny sounds forming our kitchen's orchestra. I got to work in the kitchen. Yolks, whites, bread slices. Each plate was laid down, in order just as Tom had called them, like we'd rehearsed it forever. Billy leaned his chin on the table, watching like it was a magic show. Every good flip earned a breath like someone crossing a bridge. Tom, still in waiter mode, nudged me under the table Mom's plate first. I nodded, no words needed. Mom sat closest to the stove. She blew the steam like turning on a spotlight, sliced a small piece, glanced at us. Tastes just right. Just that line set the cafe humming softly. Billy whispered. Yeah, Tom added a check mark. I scribbled under the top 2 dishes, made by hand, made by heart. I loved how the kitchen light turned soft and golden, clinging to every old detail, the scuffed salt jar, chipped drawer handle, frayed curtain cord. Everything felt like it belonged here just for tonight. As head chef, I felt older. Tom, the waiter, softer. Billy, our tiny guest, hilariously serious. And Mom, as owner, only had to keep the room breathing. We called for a second round. Tom circled moonlight fried egg, leaned toward Mom. Any discount for loyal customers. She tilted her head. Only for those who sit near the stove. Billy jumped. That's my seat. He swapped with me, face lit like a polished bulb. I returned to the kitchen and gave him a job. When the second hand hits 12, tell me to flip. He saluted. After each plate, Tom read, customer reviews. Edges crispy yolk like the last moon. Toast so crisp it tells stories. I added in the margins, customer laughed half full. Mom chuckled enough. Eat before it cools. She let dinner flow at the right pace like a conductor hiding her baton. At some point I saw my reflection in the window, a kid with an invisible chef's hat, sweat on his temple, eyes locked on butter rings. Even now at 68, that image brings quiet joy. When you rename your circumstances, they soften. Dinner moved with jokes and pencil scribbles. The menu filled with check marks, corners damp from hands. I flipped it like closing a journal after a good show. The radio-dimmed kitchen light still golden. The cafe had done its job pulling us together with only a few words and a little imagination. Once we settled into the rhythm, Mom told me to pause the stove and bring over the loaf. She eyed the knife groove, then tilted the blade. Tonight we cut thinner. Not an order, a shared secret. Thinner means crispier. The crust will talk to you. I leaned in like an apprentice. The knife scraped dry. Shht. Crumbs fell like soft snow onto the cutting board. Sometimes a beautiful name is just a way to cover worry. That's a sentence I didn't find until much later in life. At the time, I just thought Mom was really good at choosing her words, making us follow along with joy. Her hands were steady, slicing each piece evenly, half the usual thickness, yet none broke. She fanned them out, golden edges stacked like roof tiles. I touched the surface, still warm, soft, like dissolved soap bubbles. Keep the flame low. Don't let the butter bubble, she said. I turned down the gas, returned to the pan, and brushed on a layer of butter, thin as tracing paper, just enough for the bread to kiss the heat without soaking through. Tom leaned silently against the wall. Billy asked for a crumb, popped it into his mouth, eyes wide. It's really crispy. I placed the first slice on the skillet. It puffed slightly, then settled as the crust browned, spreading a smell that brought back Sunday mornings at roadside diners where toast gets flipped like pages in a book. Mom told me, press the edge a bit with the spatula, helps the crust hit more butter. I did and heard a gentle sizzle from the pan's rim. I was learning to wait, not flipping from eagerness, not stalling out of doubt. Mom looked at me, one hand on her hip. In the kitchen, the hardest part is knowing when it's time. Life, too. Her words drifted through me like a cold draft through a cracked window. I didn't nod, just smiled slightly, not wanting to break the rhythm I'd finally found. I flipped the toast on cue, soft little thump. Steam rose from the crust, in wisps, forming a crown at the edges. That's it, Mom said, reaching for the cinnamon jar. The lid was stuck. She twisted twice. The smell floated up, not sharp, but warm, like a sun-dried quilt tucked in a cedar drawer. She tapped a bit onto a spoon, just enough to pass like a polite guest. I plated the toast, carefully lined up evenly, placing the crispiest on Mom's plate. Tom noticed, but stayed quiet. Chef here knows presentation, he joked to Billy. Billy reached but paused under Mom's glance, then waited. I stirred a little more vanilla into warm water until the scent melted through. Pick the crispy edge first, Mom whispered. I understood. Crispy breaks easier, but it's also the best. Giving someone else the best bite isn't something you teach in words. It's taught by hand. We ate not silent, but easy. Butter clung to our fingertips. I licked mine out of habit. The salt hit the sweet, and my teeth cracked into the crust. Crumbs scattered like sunbits on my plate. Tom tapped his spoon gently between bites, like keeping time. I saw how Mom always divided things evenly, not by math, but by feeling. She'd say, "This edge is crispier," or "the yolk's leaning your way." I learned to notice what leaned, what needed a gentle nudge. Sometimes fairness is just that, seeing the tilt. By the third slice, I slowed down. Something caught in my throat, not toast, but pride. That tight knot in a boy who wants to say I'm fine, but fears it might sound too small. Mom sliced another thin piece. I heard the knife hiss through bread, the tap on the board. She looked up, met my eyes, smiled, and said nothing. That not asking gave me the room I needed to swallow. I swallowed something else with that toast childhood pride. That sentence only came to me years later. But in that moment, I felt warmth rise in my chest. I pushed my plate toward Tom. "You take this edge." Tom, understanding, scooped the softer part with his fork and passed it back to me. No one won. It was just a trade to keep the warmth unbroken. Mom rested her hand on my shoulder, light as a butterfly. "Keep the fire going, okay?" she said. I turned to the stove, brushed the pan, kept the butter thin, just like she'd shown me. I noticed with less butter the scent sharpens. With lower heat, the sizzle softens. Those details gave me a quiet confidence, like maybe the world inside one skillet was mine to guide. Billy hands, sticky with butter, reached for a napkin, but just made it worse. He laughed, hid his hands behind his back, and tilted his head for another slice. Mom gave him one, gently tapping his forehead with the fork, like stamping a ticket. Tom turned the radio, the click-click of shifting frequencies like changing hours. He landed on an instrumental like the open road at night. And in that moment, between the scent of butter and cinnamon, the quiet scrape of a knife and a boy's sticky fingers, I saw dignity pass through the meal like heat from the pan, quiet, wordless. We didn't have much, but we renamed things to make them feel whole. Thin toast was extra crisp. Sharing an edge was eating with grace. Saving butter became preserving taste. Knowing when to flip, that was keeping the flame. That night marked something on my growing up scale, not because I cooked better, but because I saw each person quietly protecting another. With a glance, a smaller slice, a crispy bit, pushed towards someone else. Those acts stacked together made a roof, sturdy enough for all of us. When the last piece left the pan, the butter's scent began to fade. I lowered the flame, listened to the stove's gentle hum. I tapped the spoon softly against the skillet, my silent "that's all," then hung it up. My hand stayed warm. Cinnamon clung to my wrist. I looked around, plates, wiped clean hands, less sticky eyes, calmer. The scent would drift, I knew, but the sound I'd learned from that skillet that stayed. The sound of enough. As dinner wound down, the window fogged. Dad turned the radio knob. A soft click, like lifting a coat hanger, then static, then a live baseball game. The announcer's voice burst in fast and clear like nights when the whole town's tuned in. I watched Dad, his chin dipped. Thoughts quieted. He tilted the radio for better reception, slid a coaster under it, then nodded like tuning an old guitar. The kitchen stopped feeling like a kitchen. It felt like the neighborhood's living room, where a ball game buzzing from a plastic box with antenna legs had chosen to stay the night. The players felt close, brought near by a voice. which pitcher, which batter, which way the wind blew. Each time the announcer paused, then shouted, "Crack our skillet," answered with a soft sizzle. Dad raised his brows, nodded, tapped the table, playing along. Between plays came those familiar jingles, a cheerful woman selling tires, a raspy man offering mower trade-ins so grass won't reach your knees. Short ads, but grounding. We were just a small family in a small kitchen hearing small-town stories. Outside, the wind pushed the door, making the bell ring faintly. Dad leaned in, "Turn it up one notch." I did. The voice grew stronger but didn't overpower the room. I turned the flame lower. The skillet hummed softly, letting the radio take the lead. On the final pitch, the announcer stretched his words. We all held our breath. I gripped the spatula, and as the hit was announced, our pan responded with a perfect sizzle like punctuation. The city cheered for the hit. Our kitchen cheered for the sizzle. Dad shifted in his seat, leaned further back, shoulders relaxing. Tom sat cross-legged back against the wall, twirling a pencil. Billy hung on every word. When the announcer got too fast, he turned to Dad for translation into our family's language. Dad smiled halfway. That hit was like flipping toast without dropping any crumbs. I laughed. I knew what he meant. Right timing, not too soon, not too late. The game went on. Across the street, a neighbor locked their gate with a metallic squeak. The smell of wet wood floated in with the breeze. The kitchen light glowed gold, spilling across the table like the color of a catcher's mitt still brand new. On the skillet, the last piece of toast waved heat like a flag. Its crisp edge browned into a ring, just like the chalk line around a base. I heard Dad say almost to himself, "Nights like this, you can hear the ball inside your head." Even now at 68, I remember how the rhythm of that night taught me to hear the sound of a peaceful family. The radio was the drum, the skillet, the beat, the clinking spoons, the bells, and Dad's nod, the silent song. This kind of music isn't on cassette tapes or vinyl records. It lives in the small habits. Turning the radio knob, just slightly tucking a coaster under the radio, lowering your voice during tense moments, letting out a breath after the hit and laughing just enough. The commentator moved on to the part where the backup player came in. Dad lifted his cup of warm water, blew softly across the surface, then took a sip. I felt an unexpected calm settle over me, like hearing a church bell ringing from the other side of town, the kind of bell that gets carried by cold wind but still finds the ears that need to hear it. Billy was counting the stitches on the old glove hanging by the door hook, the one I'd picked up from the schoolyard years ago. Then he asked, "Do longer stitches make the ball fly farther, Dad?" Dad didn't answer right away. He rested a hand on Billy's head and gave a gentle press, a reply without words, a nod in motion. Some questions only need rhythm. A high fly ball. The commentator stretched out the word back, back, back. Tom and I instinctively counted the beats. Billy held his breath. Mom looked over at Dad. Somewhere the stadium exploded into a sea of cheers. And in our kitchen, the skillet let out a perfect sizzle just as I flipped the toast, while the tap of Mom's fork against her bowl rang out like a little bell signaling next turn. It hit me all at once. A whole working-class America could fold neatly into an old radio and a cast-iron pan, each keeping time without stepping on the other. I'll never forget the look in Dad's eyes at that moment. Maybe a little wet, or maybe it was just the light. The whole day seemed to pour out of him, and what was left behind was calm and rhythm. He gave one more nod, like stamping approval on the game he had just played in his own way. and in my head a sentence formed, one that still holds true all these years. Later happiness. It turns out has a simple rhythm. Right as I was stacking the dishes, the kitchen light flickered 3 times and went out clean like someone snapping their fingers. Darkness filled the room, quickly but not thickly. It felt more like a velvet cloth being draped over a piano mid-song. Suddenly, every lingering note stood out clearer. When the lights go out, the kitchen feels closer. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Even the radio fell silent, stuttering once, then dying completely. The cold wind outside paused too, giving way to the soft sounds of the house, the creak of expanding wood, the tick of the wall clock, nudging into a new kind of silence. Mom reached into the drawer, pulled out a box of matches and a short white candle, sticking it into a thick-bottomed glass. The match struck clean, the flame snapped alive, and a tiny glow jumped across the countertop, clinging to any place where someone sat. Candlelight changed everything's character. A scratch on the table became a thin golden stream. The salt jar turned into a small planet. Wisps of steam off the skillet looked like silk ribbons. The smell of butter grew stronger, like the darkness helped the scent molecules find each other and hold hands tighter. Billy went, still hugging his pillow without realizing it, his eyes peeking out at the flame like it was a tiny bird. Tom cleared his throat. All right, dear guests, time for our special feature stories. In the dark, he shifted into a deeper voice, adding drama to every syllable. Once upon a time, there was a kitchen, and every time the lights went out, the spoons would start tapping the bowls on their own. Billy shrunk his neck. For real, Tom chuckled and flicked the side of a bowl with his finger ting. Billy flinched, then laughed it off, raising the pillow to cover his face. Dad reached over and lowered the pillow just enough for Billy to still see the flame. A movement so gentle it made Dad's shoulders seem softer than usual. Outside it was drizzling, not heavy rain, just that half-wet, half-dry sound of snow mixing with rain drumming lightly on the roof. In the dark, every sound seemed magnified through a microscope. I could hear the breath of people, of the stove, of the whole house twisting into a little cloud hovering above the table. Mom placed the candle glass in the center. The flame wavered, as if it were breathing too, dancing when someone laughed, holding still when someone paused. I poured another cup of warm water and handed it to Dad, my fingers brushing his cracked knuckles. They were unexpectedly warm. Mom pulled her chair closer to his shoulder to shoulder. Tom kept telling the story about walking kitchen tools tossing in clumsy bits, about a skillet that could dance and a fork that could play rooster fights, making Billy burst into laughter. His laugh was sharp and sudden, like popcorn hitting a hot pan. And among all those sounds, there was one that came quietly, but it was everything Dad's soft laugh, just once short but warm enough to touch. In the dark, I heard my father laugh rare like a shooting star. With no electric light, the space between us felt smaller. I could see Mom's eyes in the candlelight, Tom dropping his usual act for quiet kindness, and Billy resting his elbow on the pillow instead of gripping it. I nudged a plate of eggs toward Dad. He shook his head but still picked out the crispy edge and set it on my plate. That's when I realized we were doing something meaningful through tiny gestures, adjusting chairs, brushing hands, leaning closer, sharing bites. The radio crackled like it wanted to return. Dad ran a hand across it. No power, just a silent box. But in my mind, the game kept playing, no announcer needed. In our kitchen, every clink of spoon was a swing. every chuckle a diving catch. I realized even when what we love goes quiet, it echoes through those beside us, the scent of butter, the candle's soft glow. "I'll light another," I offered. Mom shook her head. "One is enough." She seemed to like how the limited light made us lean in and really look at each other. I understood. Just enough light reveals what matters and softens what should fade, like the worry earlier, like the envelope on the table's edge. Tom ended the tale softly. Turns out it was just the wind. Billy sighed but clung to his bangs, staying inside the safety of the story. Time slowed in the dark. The butter's scent settled like the last note of a song. At 68, I finally found words for a truth shortage can be space room for other things to arrive. No lights meant candles. No noise meant we heard the quiet. No extras meant every crisp edge was treasured. The rain stopped. The candle burned low, its wax wrapping the flame like a palm holding warmth. Mom stirred the air gently with her spoon, meaningless yet perfectly timed, and whispered, "Going to bed early sounds good." Dad didn't speak. His hand found hers under the table and gave a soft squeeze. Tom cleared dishes without sound. Billy stood beside me, candle in hand, like a quiet gatekeeper. When the power returned, light flooded the room, suddenly like someone yanking open the curtains. We squinted, and I realized I'd grown used to the kind dark. The light restored the usual, but underneath was a new layer: candle warmth, soft hands, and the rare music of Dad's laugh. Dad turned the radio back on. The voice picked up the game like it had never paused. "Score's the same," it said. But to us, the score had shifted in a way only we understood. I glanced around. Crumbs still scattered, a wax-ringed cup, the light warmer than before. The night wasn't longer, but it had deepened. I turned off the stove. The flame curled like a grain of rice and vanished. The skillet's warmth stayed in my palm for a second before letting go. I hung it back, and the soft clink of metal marked the end. But between these full stops, a small comma had entered our lives, a comma named dinner by candlelight. And now, whenever darkness comes suddenly, I do not fear. I find a candle and wait for someone I love to sit close. Once the room was still, the diner was short of just one plate to complete the circle. I took the last kitchen shift, like it was a final round: one egg, one slice of bread, one small chance to round out the evening. I tapped the spatula against the pan's edge, kept the flame low, soft as a whisper. The yolk was round and shiny, sitting in the center like a newly risen moon. I tilted the pan slightly so the butter hugged the rim. The scent floated gently around my wrist. Tom stood half a step behind me, silent, breathing in sync. Billy rested his chin on the edge of the table, eyes wide. Dad leaned forward, elbow on the table, hand resting lightly over Mom's, both of them. Quiet, waiting for the familiar sizzle. I slid the spatula under the egg white, ready to flip it in one smooth move. But as I hit the moment I thought was just right, the blade slipped a little too deep. The pan was slick, and that bright little moon wobbled, then broke. The yolk spilled, a golden streak flowing out, steaming softly at the edges, spreading across the waiting toast. The scent of slightly burnt egg rose sharp, but not harsh, like a reminder I had messed up. Tom whistled quietly. "Oops. Moon's broken." The joke was light as air, but it landed exactly where I was most tense. I snapped, "If you're so good, come do it yourself." My voice was sharp, prickly, bursting out before I could stop it. The kitchen fell silent. The radio shifted to a soft hiss, then corrected itself and went silent again. Billy pulled his hands back, chin slipping off the table's edge. Mom paused for half a second, eyes on me, but didn't say anything. Dad sipped his water and set the cup down slowly. Somewhere the sound of ceramic on ceramic tinged like a tiny reminder of tempo. My anger spread fast, just like the broken yolk. The yellow streak on the pan looked exactly like the feeling inside my chest, warm, messy, uncontrolled. I bent down, pretending to be busy salvaging what was left, pulling the intact parts back toward the center, but my hands were shaking a bit. My face flushed and my throat tightened like swallowing a bite of toast before it cooled. No one scolded me, but the silence made my outburst heavier than any reply could have. Tom didn't say anything. He waited a beat, then walked around the table and gently placed the nicest plate, the one with the green rim. No chips at my place. He turned it carefully so the crispiest toast edge faced me. No words, no eye contact. Just the plate rotated in my direction. No apology needed. The plate did the talking. I stood still, fully aware of the unspoken rule among boys raised in backyards and tight kitchens. Some apologies are given through portion, not words. It's not cowardice. It's just about not making anyone feel embarrassed. I turned off the stove for half a second, took a breath in, then let it out. Mom turned away, pretending to tidy napkins. Dad reached over and adjusted the radio knob, warming up the background static like laying a blanket over a sharp remark. I placed the broken moon plate in Tom's spot. He didn't resist or act noble. He simply dipped his fork into the thickening yolk, pulled it across the toast in a clean yellow line, and said, "Still the moon, just rising." I laughed, crumbs of laughter flicking off my tongue like the crumbs on a cooling spoon. I felt less rigid. Billy leaned over and placed the crispiest edge he'd been holding onto my plate. He whispered, "For you." I nodded, this time with no sharpness. I turned the flame back on, warmed the pan slightly, then turned it off for good. In my head, everything found its place. My snap settled behind me, the best plate in front of me, and our breathing in the room clicked back into sync. I didn't say sorry, and Tom didn't need it, but our meal flowed back together like a road that had just smoothed out. I took a bite, just the right size, and chewed slowly. The bitterness of the scorched egg mellowed against the butter, the black pepper rising like a finishing note. At 68, looking back at that moment, I know now love sometimes looks like a rotated plate. When the room had completely settled, Mom stood up like she had just remembered a secret compartment in the kitchen. She opened the upper cabinet and pulled down a glass measuring cup with faded lines and a thick handle, weighing it in her hand like she was testing its warmth. She poured in sugar, medium-sized crystals that hit the glass with a soft, rattling sound like night rain tapping on a tin roof, then added water. The water turned cloudy for a moment, then slowly cleared. "A little cinnamon," she said, unscrewing a jar, its scent rising like sun-warmed blankets, and then a drop of cheap vanilla amber in color slid in, leaving a thin trail before melting away. She placed the measuring cup on the smaller burner, lit it low, and guided the handle with her hand, like leading a slow waltz. I stood beside her, learning how to wait for one more beat. Inside the cup, the sugar began to breathe, tiny bubbles forming around the glass edges, a soft simmer, like someone laughing shyly. Mom stirred with a wooden spoon, slow and steady, the spoon clinking gently against the glass. With each circle, the rising steam thickened, carrying sweetness that touched our cheeks and made them pink. If poverty had a flavor, it would be warm and sweet like this. That sentence until this day feels like someone said aloud what I was thinking that night. Tom leaned in and took a deep breath. Billy stood on tiptoe trying to see the bubbles. Dad lifted the cup slightly, checking the thickness, then gave a subtle nod, the kind of nod that meant just right. Mom turned off the flame. Steam rose for a few more seconds, then settled like fog over a quiet field. She poured the syrup into a shallow enamel bowl. Ivory, thin-rimmed, cracked at the base, seasoned by years of meals. She placed it at the center of the table and said simply, "Dessert." That was all. But the way she placed it, hands drawn in wrist, relaxed bowl, barely touching the surface, made the cinnamon syrup feel like something long awaited. Tom slid into his waiter persona, tonight's special mist over the fields. Billy's eyes widened. Why mist? Tom dipped a toast corner into the bowl, drew it up trailing syrup, and laid it down in a soft curl. Because it's thin, it melts, and it's gentle. Billy laughed out loud, not needing the full meaning. I tore a piece of bread and dipped it. My fingers came back, warm, sticky. Cinnamon touched my tongue, first vanilla, a beat later, then a rounded sweetness. Not sharp but whole, like a memory remembering you. Dad tried his own way, drizzling syrup with the back of a spoon into a thin layer. He bit in, inhaled like a tea taster, and the corner of his lips lifted slightly. Mom slid the bowl toward me. "You're sous chef. You taste first." I nodded, dipped a crisp edge, and brought it up. The toast hit my tongue, warm like a hand, sweet like a lullaby. I let it sit, listening to cinnamon bloom, vanilla whisper, winter stories, sugar melt. I imagined diner windows fogged with breath, a Bell coffee in the air. But that was pretend. Truth was a small kitchen, one bowl of syrup, 4 people I loved. My most real thing. Tom taught Billy the ritual: don't dip too deep or sweetness overwhelms. Just touch, lift, let it drip once. Billy did it right. One perfect drop plop, and we all laughed. Mom clapped softly, turned to me. "Sous chef earns another slice." I bowed playfully. Dad gently moved the best-looking piece to Mom's plate, his answer to the earlier strain. We ate slowly, timed by quiet spoon taps, like wind brushing through thin curtains. Steam thinned, leaving scent behind cinnamon, at the nose vanilla on the palate. The kitchen window cleared just enough to see how deep night had fallen, but in the misty parts I felt warmer, because inside syrup and people had made peace. One small moment I didn't notice until much later became the centerpiece. Mom set her spoon down, palm turned upward slightly, as if allowing something to pass. She looked around, not stopping on anyone, but somehow ensuring we all had our share, crispy, sweet calm. My throat caught again, not from sorrow, but from thankfulness. Sometimes it's the scraps, a bite, a drop, a nod, that when placed right are enough. I understand now why the simplest things last the longest, because they have fewer edges to break, fewer layers to fade. A bowl of cinnamon syrup and 1 drop of cheap vanilla might not tell a grand story, but it can anchor an evening, carry a flavor that decades later makes an old man like me standing in a supermarket want to go home the moment he smells cinnamon. Tom had one last trick. He sprinkled cinnamon on Billy's plate, then used the tip of a fork to draw an uneven star on his toast. "This star rises right on time," he said. Billy giggled, pretending to make a wish by blowing softly on the cinnamon star as if it might fly. Dad reminded him, "Do not say your wish out loud, or it will disappear." Billy nodded and hugged the wish to his chest like a kitten. Mom gathered the dishes, but left the syrup bowl in the center for a while longer, like holding on to the scent a little more. I cleaned the skillet and hung it up, listening to the final clink of metal on hook. The radio was still on, but faint, just the shadow of sound. In the yellow light, cinnamon flecks lay on the table like punctuation marks, ending the night's story with an ellipsis to be continued, but not in a rush. I looked around. The tired looks had softened, the eyes had calmed. At this age, when I retell a memory, I often look for an image to frame it. For that night, my frame is a white enamel bowl with hairline cracks, holding a thin ring of leftover syrup, light brown, warm and sweet. If someone asked for the map back to my childhood, I would point to that syrup ring. Just that, and it would be enough to bring back the old kitchen mom's hands, the clink of ceramic, the hiss of butter, and Dad's rhythmical nod, all still there waiting for me in the scent of cinnamon. After the laughter quieted, Tom nudged me. "Wait," he signaled. He pulled a small fabric bag from under the cabinet, unzipped it, and took out a borrowed Polaroid camera from a neighbor. The square body was worn at the edges. He stroked it gently like petting a stubborn animal. "Take a picture," Tom said, "so tomorrow we can believe this night really happened." Mom smiled. "Just make sure the messy sink is not in the frame." Dad cleared his throat, gently pulled up the tablecloth a notch, and straightened the glass still streaked with white wax. "Everyone look this way," Tom directed. He snapped open the camera, the spring sound like a tiny guitar string being plucked. 1, 2. I saw Billy pressing his lips together to hide a grin, Mom tilting her head, just enough so her gaze landed on Dad. And Dad somehow held on to his half-smile, not showy, just real. Tom clicked the shutter. The whir of the picture sliding out sounded like a freshly printed ticket. Everyone fell silent. Only the smell of developing chemicals rose, sharp and sweet like a newly opened toy. "Do not shake it too hard or it will ruin," Mom warned. Tom held the photo by its corners like he was carrying a too thin slice of cake. We huddled around the photo, watching ourselves slowly emerge from the white. First the border, then blotches of light and shadow, like the night retelling itself in a language only the eyes could read. Dad leaned back in his chair, his face turned slightly toward Mom. Billy stretched across the table, eyes round. I stood behind Mom, fingers still sticky with sugar, leaving a faint smudge on the photo's corner. Tom, the photographer, only had one shoulder in frame. Not studio perfect, not lined up, but somehow it was exactly right for this kitchen for this night. I do not know when this sentence etched itself into me. In a photo, poverty does not get time to disguise itself, but smiles do not need to. The picture developed slowly like an adult, answering a tough question. Its white edge yellowed as time drifted in. Candlelight landed on Mom's cheek like a gentle comma. My sugar-sticky finger left a faint trace barely visible, yet years later, I still see it like a child's quiet signature. Dad brushed it gently with his thumb, then stopped, careful not to disturb what was still forming. "Let me see," he said, taking the photo. His cracked thumb stood in contrast to its smooth surface. In between was the long day he'd walked through. He nodded, not to say anything, just as someone who knows how to tuck away something precious. Mom leaned into his shoulder, exhaled softly, then smiled. Not for the camera, but for the one holding it. Tom placed the photo on the table right on top of our handwritten menu. One told the story in words, one in image, and together they gave the evening its spine. Billy asked, "When's it dry?" Tom said, "When we stop staring." I laughed, brushing its edge again, adding one last sugar glaze. Even now that sweetness, clings faintly to the photo's corner. Dad got up, took the photo to the fridge, and used the same magnet that held unpaid bills to pin it right in the middle. Among reminders of what needed doing now, sat one that just needed remembering. The kitchen shifted, no longer just a place we passed through, but somewhere we'd return. We all went back to our seats. Stories picked up again. But to me, that night now had proof. Years later, whenever I find that photo in an old box, its corners curled, its chemicals faded, I hear that first soft whir, like striking a match in the dark. The picture may blur, the feeling won't. I learned legacy isn't always a thing you leave behind. It's scent, rhythm, the way you rename hard times so your loved ones feel no shame. Even now with Linda adjusting the spoons and our boys arguing over cinnamon, I still feel that old Polaroid standing quietly at the room's center. And even now retired, the little scratched radio waits on its shelf for nights. I misdial and land on a song I forgot I loved. I stand by the stove. Linda hands me the spoon like Maggie once did. Our son's now grown lean on the door, arms crossed. Grinning, Dad, we're at the sizzling part. I nod, and suddenly I need nothing more. Then, one late autumn day, with golden light coating the wooden porch like a layer of honey, I brought the cast iron skillet back to the old house. Mom was 91, her hair white like frost on the fence, her hands trembling as she held a cracked porcelain cup. The kitchen was quiet except for the slow ticking of the clock. I placed the skillet exactly where it had always been, took out the yellowed Polaroid from a shoebox and leaned it against the salt jar. Mom tilted her head, smiled softly. So this is breakfast under the stars. I turned on the stove. The flame stood steady like an upside-down candle. Do we still have enough butter? She asked. Enough for the whole memory, I said, sprinkling in a little cinnamon, keeping the heat low. The scent of butter crept along the wooden shelves, climbed up the windowsill, and wrapped around us like an old scarf. Mom watched me cook, no rush, no instructions, just the look of someone passing down a little light. When I flipped the final slice of bread, time seemed to pause. I placed the plate in front of her. She held it with both hands and whispered, "This smell," then let the scent do the talking. We ate slowly. The afternoon sun slid through the window, laying a soft golden stripe across the table. "Do you remember that night?" she asked. "I remember even the click of the Polaroid." I smiled. Her warm hand rested on the back of mine, light as a bird. "Good. You kept the rhythm." I pointed to the bright spot where candlelight once flickered, right there. "I see, Dad." Mom nodded, her voice calm as water that had settled after many ripples. "Your father sits there always." From the living room, the radio hummed a quiet gap. Not music, just a silence between two stories. Enough to hear the peace of home. After washing the dishes, I did not turn on the lights. The stove was still lit by the porch lamp. Mom leaned back in her chair. "It's getting cold. Close the door." I shut it, hung the skillet. The soft clink brushed against the old photo, ringing gently across its faded white edge. Before leaving, I pinned the photo a bit higher so the light could catch it better. Mom watched me. Some dinners aren't cooked because of hunger. I placed my hand on her shoulder. This dinner didn't happen because we ran out of food. It happened because we still had each other. I stepped down the front steps. The air smelled of dry leaves and damp wood. At 68 years old, what holds me in every kitchen is still a scent and a rhythm, the old smell of butter, Dad's nod mom's spoon tapping ceramic, the candle flickering like it was breathing, and a polaroid pinned to the fridge with a magnet. If someone asked me for proof of a night that felt whole, I would invite them to sit down in the kitchen, rename dinner one more time, right there between the glow in the window and the scent of butter that is just enough. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment about a humble dish that once brought your whole family together. And if you want to keep walking with me through more of these breakfasts under the stars, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so every evening we can have a kitchen to come home to.